Thank you all so much for coming to this afternoon's Brown Bag Lunch. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Jarrett, and I'm the curator here at the Amelia Island Museum of History. Now, before we get started today, I'd like to ask everyone to please silence or turn off their cell phones, just so we don't have any interruptions while our speaker is presenting. Before I turn it over to Ms. Mann, I do have a few quick announcements about upcoming programs and events happening at the museum. Join us all next week for a trip into the past as figures from Fernandina's history come back to life through costume actors in Boscovelo Cemetery. Next Saturday, October 14th, is our Graveside Chronicles event, which gives visitors a chance to tour the cemetery and learn about local history from beyond the grave. You might even recognize some of the names from this very presentation during that tour. Tickets are available online and going fast, so secure your spot for Graveside Chronicles today. Next month's Brown Bag Lunch will be presented by Wes Hinton, Vice President. Oh, yes?
So I noticed that times are from 9 to 5.
Yes. So we have different times throughout the day that you can select the one that works best for you.
And what are the intervals? Like an hour?
I believe they start every 10 or 15 minutes, although I would have to double check that.
And you can do that?
Yes, I can let you know afterwards. Next month's Brown Bag Lunch will be presented by Wes Hinton, the Vice President of Wildlife. He'll be speaking about the Florida low country culture that's guiding the development of wildlife out in Muley, the plans for wildlife's future, and answering any questions that the community might have. This will be a great opportunity to hear about what's happening on the mainland and ask questions about developments that influence the entire Nassau County community. You won't want to miss
What
this.
day is that? I'm sorry?
That's November 1st at noon.
November 1st?
Yes, sir.
Hi, Sally.
Now, finally, I have the honor of introducing a speaker for this afternoon. Dixon Mann is a native of Nassau County and a sixth-generation Floridian. Her ancestors came to Florida prior to 1800, receiving land grants before moving to Levy County. Miss Mann came to Fernandina when she was 3 years old and has become an avid and accomplished genealogist, having written family histories for 5 different families and editing additional volumes. In addition to her genealogical work, Miss Mann has been active in the island community, organizing the Amelia Island chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, serving on the state and national level for the DAR, and being involved in both the museum and the Historic District Council. So without any further wait, please join me in welcoming Ms. Jean Dixon Mann.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here today and to see some faces I recognize and some that I don't. I said when I first came to Fernandina, there were 3,500 people on the island. Now there are like 25,000, so there are a lot more people that have come here that I don't always recognize. To start with, I am not a member of the Fernandez family. I started researching this family about 25 years ago when the Catholic Church first wanted to expand their church building. And it looked, I was on the Historic District Council at the time, and it looked as if they wanted to expand onto the Fernandez grant. And I had always been told that that was a private grant that did not belong to the church. And so my purpose in researching the family was to find all of the descendants, because I wanted to make sure that the church had permission from all of the family members if they were going to expand. Well, one thing led to another, and my research began. It was about 10 years before I put my research into the first book that I did, and then a few years ago when additional information came to me that you will hear about, I did a second edition of the book, but with limited printing. But anyway, the Fernandez Reserve, which I call the last Spanish land grant in Florida, is between St. Michael's Church and St. Michael's School, and has remained in the same family since being granted to Domingo Fernandez by the Spanish government. When the family decided to sell the property known as Yellow Bluff and Louisa Plantation to the Florida Railroad Company, the 1 acre that contained the family burial ground was exempted from the sale, and all future sales exempted that one specific acre. And so thus, to my mind, this acre is still the last Spanish land grant in Florida. Domingo Fernandez, who was the patriarch of the family, was the grantee of the property. And he came to Florida about 1786 as captain of a gunboat named La Canaria, which was to protect the Spanish properties after Spain regained control of Florida following the end of the American Revolution. He was born in Vigo, Galicia, Spain, and his parents were Fructosa Figueroa and Josefa Fernandez. Living in what is now known as Old Town, he became friendly with Maria Mater, who provided fresh produce to the inhabitants of Old Town. Maria had come to Amelia Island during the English occupation from Pensacola, but when the English left, she had no funds in which to provide for leaving, so she and her two children, Louis and Mary, or Maria, remained in Old Town. Whoops, that's not where I want to go. Okay. Domingo received the first of many land grants from the Spanish government beginning in April of 1797. And between 1800 and 1807, he received additional grants, including Yellow Bluff Plantation, located in what is now New Fernandina. And at his death in 1833, he owned more than 20,000 acres in Northeast Florida. The Fernandez homestead was located on a bluff above the Amelia River, probably near the location of the Fernandez Reserve. And the family burying ground was near the family homestead, since that was what everyone did at that time. The bluff sloped down to the river with a dock for ease of transportation of goods to and from Old Town, as well as shipment to other locations. And also on this property was what was called the Fernandez Well, also known as the water battery, and this was used as a starting point for all surveys in New Fernandina. And you may recall from other history that when David Levy-Yulee wanted to build his railroad from Fernandina to Cedar Key, he did not want to have to build the railroad over the marsh from what is New Fernandina to Old Town. And so he convinced the people of Fernandina at that time to move their town. And he bought property from Yellow Bluff Plantation and was a good salesman, because he sold lots for about $50 each and moved the town. And what was left was Old Town. The only bullfight that has ever been in Florida was held at Yellow Bluff Plantation. And the fiesta was detailed by Susan Batio-Lingle in her autobiography. The fiesta, she said, was held on a Sunday afternoon, and it was complete with a banquet and a ball. But in the afternoon, guests were escorted to an arena where a young Spaniard dressed as a matador entered the ring with several small red flags, followed by several dogs of various sizes, none of which were very ferocious. After he played with the dogs for a while, a small white bull was led into the arena. The crowd was amused when the matador jumped into the amphitheater to evade the attack of the bull, and they shouted, "Bravo el torete." When the matador prevailed in eluding the bull, the chant changed to "Bravo el matador." The matador managed to nick the bull slightly, and he was led away to recover from his slight wounds. Following the entertainment, the guests returned to an after-dinner course of watermelons, peaches, and figs. And even though Susan Lingle did not specify when the bullfight took place, my thinking is that it was probably sometime during the month of August, because that's when watermelons, peaches, and figs are all readily available. After they had had their after-dinner course, dancing was resumed until the close of the evening, and the guests returned to their boats while the band played on and moonbeams shone on the water. Maria, or Mary Mater, who was the daughter, came to Amelia Island with her mother, Maria Mater, and her brother Louis during the English occupation. Her father Louis had died previously, possibly in St. Augustine. In 1787, the Spanish granted the mother a tract of land became known as Naranjal, or the Orange Grove, on the southern end of Amelia Island, near the mouth of the Nassau River. Governor Cespedes decided that Amelia Island must be fortified, and the best place for the fortification was the bluff top where Maria had her family home. The Spanish government decided it was easier to move Maria than it was to find a new place for their fortification, and thus the grant of the Orange Grove. At the time of the 1787 census of Florida, Maria and her family were the only inhabitants of Amelia Island recorded in the Spanish census. Louis Mater would eventually inherit the Orange Grove from his mother, and he would later sell the property to Domingo. In 1790, Maria Mater died, and Domingo Fernandez was made guardian of her two children. At the time, the daughter Mary was 13 and Domingo was 24. I suppose that this guardianship brought the two of them closer together. For on the 23rd of December of 1793, they would be married in the Cathedral of St. Its cathedral at St. Augustine, when Mary was only 16 years old. Domingo and Mary would make their home on Yellow Bluff Plantation, and tradition indicates that Mary did much of the supervision of the estate, and Domingo spent a great deal of time looking at the stars, though sources that have been located do indicate that he took some oversight of the plantation, and at one time he was even brought to trial for the death of one of his slaves, which he was acquitted of because other slaves came by and said the guy was sick and he didn't really beat him to death after all. Upon moving to Yellow Bluff Plantation, Domingo donated land which would become known as Boscobello Cemetery for a city cemetery. And there have been floods throughout the years which probably washed away some of the old graves, or at least buried them. And the earliest known burial at Boscobello today is that of Peter Boussois de Nacar, who died in 1813. And at one time, his original monument was there. Today, there is a replacement monument for him. Following Domingo's death, Mary would sell 6 acres of their property for the lighthouse at Amelia Island for $500. This is a rare issue, a copy of the obituary of Domingo from a rare issue of the Florida Herald from 1833. And this obituary gives a great deal of information about his gives about his history when he came to Florida, all of this, which has been valuable for us. These were the children of Domingo and Mary. 4 of the 7 lived to adulthood, and those 4 are the ones that I will give you a little more information about today. And this is just another representation of the children. The oldest daughter to live to adulthood was Mary Josephine Patricia Figueroa Fernandez, a mouthful. She became known in later life as Mary J.P. She was born in March of 1798, probably on Amelia Island, and was baptized later that same month in St. Augustine. In 1816, she married Captain John Atkinson. He had served in the War of 1812 and was a representative in the Georgia legislature from 1811 to 1816. They lived in Camden County, and unfortunately he died in 1820 without them having any children. In 1822, she married Richard Lang, the son of Isaac Lang and Catherine Wiles, and continued to live in Georgia. Catherine Wiles' family, if you may know or may not know, there's a cemetery out in West Nassau County off of US 17 called the Wild Cemetery, and this was her family. By 1840, the Langs had moved to Jefferson County, Florida, which is over near Madison, and acquired a substantial plantation in that area. They were the parents of 6 children. The oldest son, Robert, married Caroline Ashley in Camden County, Georgia, and before 1860, they had moved to Harris County, Texas, where they had real estate valued at $10,000 and personal property of $13,500, which included 16 slaves. By 1870, Robert was dead, and the family's estate had decreased to $2,500, indicating the end of the Civil War and the end of slavery. Another son died in infancy. Daughter Mary would inherit her mother's estate. The secondary inheritor of her mother's estate was a nephew who died before she did, so she became the sole inheritor. And Mary did not marry until she was 53, suggesting to me that her husband married her for her fortune. Son Lemuel was captured at the Battle of Gettysburg and died at Point Lookout Prison in 1864. Daughter Priscilla married James Kilpatrick, and daughter Satilla married John Robert Cooksey in a double wedding ceremony over in Madison, Florida. Both of the daughters have numerous descendants, many still living in Florida, West Florida, and some even living here in Fernandina. Stephen Domingo Fernandez was the oldest son, and he was born in 1810. He would marry Eliza Louise Gunby, the sister of Maria O'Neill, who was the wife of James O'Neill of O'Neill fame. And you all know that O'Neill is the first traffic light after you go off the island. They lived primarily in Duval County. Some sources say that Stephen died in Texas in 1854, but I have not been able to find documented evidence of that. It's 25 years. There seems to be no evidence other than family history. And Eliza is buried in Oak Grove Cemetery in St. Mary's, along with one of their children, Selena. Eliza's tombstone is inscribed with "My Mother" and her initials ELF. The tombstone was broken in half right at the point where there was another inscription. And my supposition is that their youngest son, John Domingo Fernandez, was probably the only child that had sufficient income in order to erect a tombstone for his mother. Stephen and Eliza were the parents of 6 children, 4 of whom lived to adulthood. And in July of 1856, James O'Neill, of O'Neill fame, was made the guardian of the minor children following the death of Eliza. And in 1860, the guardianship was transferred to Dr. Richard Potts Daniel, a prominent doctor in Jacksonville. And these are the children of Stephen and Eliza. The oldest daughter, as I said, Maria Isabel, married Dr. Potts, who had been her guardian. And she was only 22 when they married in 1858. And unfortunately, she died by 1863, but they would have had one son, Richard Bowen Daniel. And I'm going to tell you a little more about him because I find this part of the family rather interesting. Dr. Daniel was one of the organizers of the Florida State Board of Health and served as president of the Florida Medical Association. He was the chief of staff he was the first chief of staff of the old St. Luke's Hospital. Now, son Bowen married Anna Hardy Bell, but they would be divorced by 1907. And Anna and Bowen were the parents of 2 daughters, Anna and Isabel. And Richard would marry his cousin, Mary Jacqueline Smith, in 1913 and moved to Colorado. His paternal grandmother and her paternal great-grandmother were the same person, Anna Gould Smith. Now, Anna Bell Daniel's second husband was Byron Hall Barnett, who with his father was the founder of the Barnett National Bank, the predecessor of the Bank of America. Anna and Bowen's divorce was apparently rather contentious since their daughters declared their father dead on one of their early passport applications, even though he was still living in Colorado. And the first Barnett divorce was probably also rather unpleasant, since the first Mrs. Barnett and Dr. Daniel were relatives. In fact, the first Mrs. Barnett was the granddaughter of Susan Fatio Lingle, who gave us the story of the bullfight. Anna and Byron, I guess because of all of the unpleasantness here, first made their home in North Berwick, Scotland, and he ran the Barnett Bank from Scotland. And between 1910 and 1937, he made 29 round-trip transatlantic voyages. And Anna made only 19, so she didn't come with him every time he came. She died in 1937 in Monte Carlo and is buried in Monte Carlo. In fact, when Byron Barnett died, his children from his first marriage apparently wrote the obituary and did not even mention his second wife. Now, as I said, Bowen and Anna had 2 daughters, Anna Hardy Daniel and Isabel Fernandez Daniel. Anna married Henry Owen of Lincolnshire, England, but was divorced by 1939. She was the mother of 2 children. Her son Arthur and his wife were scholarly writers, and he was the under-librarian at Cambridge University. And Isabel married Richard Phillips in Georgetown, Malaysia, then moved to Nanyuki, Kenya, about 1923, where they raised their daughter, Mary Barnett Phillips. Dick died of blackwater fever in 1935, and then Isabel married John Gordon Sandilands, who was the 13th Lord Torpisham, whose ancestral home is Calder Castle in Scotland. Mary married Patrick Walker Monroe. One of her sons lives in England. One son lives in Australia. And I was, for many years, was in contact with this son in Australia, who provided me with much of the information about his mother and his grandmother and his great aunt. The next son was Edwin Adolphus Fernandez. This is still the son of Stephen and Eliza. Edwin was wounded in Williamsburg in 1862 and had a leg amputated at Clifton Hospital in Washington, D.C. He was later released that year and returned to Florida. He was the lighthouse keeper at the old Dames Point Lighthouse, which existed below the present-day Dames Point Bridge. And for this work, he was paid $600 a year. Edwin's first wife, Alice.
Question? Or no, afterwards?
Afterwards, please. Edwin's first wife, Alice, was the daughter of William Ross, who was a wealthy merchant and farmer in Lake City. And after she died in their second year of marriage, he married Mary Louise Wheeler from New London, Connecticut. And they were the parents of one son, Richard Stephen Fernandez, who was only 3 when his mother died and only 14 when his father died. He was shuffled between families between Florida and Connecticut during his early years, which may have caused the depression which followed him through most of his adult life. And he was married to Eva Louise Miller by 1903, and they had 4 daughters. Whoops. After Isabel's death, her sister Evelyn married Dr. Daniel. And she had no children, and they were married for about 8 years, after which Dr. Daniel married Anand Fernandez. Stephen's youngest son was Dr. John Domingo Fernandez, who studied medicine at the Medical School of Virginia and practiced medicine in Jacksonville. He was the secretary-treasurer of the Florida Medical Association from 1878 until 1902, and served as secretary until his death in 1913. Though he married twice to 2 sisters, he had no children. In 1873, he married Louise Sanford Douglas, and in 1904, he married Cornelia Douglas Holland. The sisters were both from Lockport, New York, whose family had moved to Jacksonville about 1867. When John died, his sole heir was his wife's nephew, Arthur Bassnett. And then the youngest child of Stephen and Stephen and Eliza was born in 1850, and she was deceased before 1860. The next daughter was Elizabeth Fernandez, who was born in 1814 on Amelia Island. And in 1833, she married George Clinton Stewart. In the 1830s, he served in the St. Mary's Volunteer Guards, and they lived in Camden County and Hilliard and over in the West Nassau County. And they also had business dealings in Charlton County, Georgia, which is Folkestone. In 1838, he signed a petition opposing the combination of the 2 Floridas. Another little bit of history, you might know that there weren't 13 English colonies during the American Revolution, there were 15. There was East Florida and West Florida, which were also part of England at the time. So most people fail to realize that there were 2 Floridas during that period of time. The Stewarts were the parents of 7 children, 4 of whom reached adulthood. Their son George died during the Civil War at the Battle of Seven Pines. DeWitt Clinton Stewart, the next son, served in the 2nd Florida Cavalry during the Civil War. He was married, but a few years ago, I was contacted by one of his descendants, I got a phone call one day wanting to know, was I the author of a book on the Fernandez family? And I said, yes, I was. She said, well, you show that DeWitt Clinton Stewart had no children, but we have done DNA tests, and we match very closely to some of the people in your book. As it turned out, in the 1870 census, DeWitt was living in West Northside County with his housekeeper, Mary Williams, who was black, with her 2 children. As it turned out, they had a non-marital relationship for over 20 years and had 12 children, all of whom lived to adulthood. Some of these children carry the Stewart name, some of the children carry the Williams name, but in every generation from that first generation until today, at least one child in every family is named either Stewart, DeWitt, or Clinton. And so with this information, I had to do a little more research and come up with a little more information. Their son Walter moved to Texas, and he and his wife had no children. Edie Tracy Stewart was named for a well-known Nassau County person, Erasmus D. Tracy. And he would marry Amanda Clayton and have 9 children. He was a farmer, merchant, cotton gin operator, and justice of the peace in Charlton County, Georgia. He was killed by a train, unfortunately. When I first began my research, I went over to the Folkestone, over the Charlton County Courthouse in Folkestone, and walked in and said, I'm doing some research on the Stewart and Fernandez family. Do you think you can help me? And the clerk of the court said, I'm married to one of them. So they were able to give me a lot of information on this family. The last daughter was Jane Cruz Fernandez. She was the youngest daughter, and these pictures are at the back of the building here. They are on permanent loan by one of the descendants, Linda Vaughn. There was apparently another picture of the other daughter of Jane and Domingo. This is their son Julius. They would have another daughter, Leonilla, and there was a painting at one time of Leonilla, but she didn't like it, and so apparently she burned the picture. Jane eloped with John Ladislaw Villalonga in 1836, and her mother apparently opposed the marriage, but she obviously changed her mind about John Villalonga after he became a wealthy merchant and cotton vendor, and because he was named as the executor of his mother-in-law's will. John was born in St. Augustine and became a successful businessman in both Camden County and in Savannah. He became a cotton factor or an agent and moved the family to Savannah. And during the Civil War, John was the chief commissary for the county, for the state of Georgia. And I have found records where the husband of Mary J.P. sold his cotton through John Villalonga. This is a picture of their house in Savannah at Taylor and Bull, which was taken about 1890. The house still exists today. These are pictures I took about 10 years ago. The last time I was in Savannah, there was additional work being done on the house. And the Villalongas were the parents of 3 children. Mary Laura died as an infant. Julius, whose picture you have seen, attended Princeton University. for 2 years and then made a grand tour of Europe. And some of his letters from that period to his parents still survive. He served in the Savannah Artillery during the Civil War and was married to Margaret Russell in 1872, and they were the parents of one child, John Ladislaw Villalonga, Jr., who was named for his grandfather. Julius predeceased his father in 1877, dying from tuberculosis. As a result, his sister Leonilla and his son John were the beneficiaries of the Villalonga estate, each receiving the equivalent of $8 million at that time. John Jr. married Constance Dumble in 1896, and they lived in New York, in Charlotte, North Carolina, Savannah, Wilmington, North Carolina, and Stamford, Connecticut. And he would later become an Episcopal minister. And this is the house that he built in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is on the National Register of Historic Places. His sister, Leonilla Villalonga, was never married, but she was a great supporter of the Catholic Church and even had an apartment at St. Joseph's Convent. She donated Carrara marble altars for both St. Michael's Church and the chapel in what was then St. Joseph's Convent, is now St. Michael's School. She adopted Edith Hood Gordon, the child of a cousin, and they both lived in the apartment at the convent for a number of years. But then Leonilla built the house at the corner of North 4th and Broome Street, which today is the church office, so that Edith would have a place to entertain her friends. She didn't think that Edith should be entertaining friends at the convent. To maintain the Fernandez Reserve, or Villalonga Park as it is sometimes known, Leonilla left a bequest to the Catholic Diocese of Florida for the upkeep of the property. And this is the way the park looked in about 1897. And this is how it looked in the early 20th century. With Fernandina being a seaport town, ship's captains became friendly with the Sisters of St. Joseph, and they would bring plants and trees from their homelands to be planted in the park. And this is another picture about 1920. I began this talk with a statement. I believe the Fernandez Reserve is the last remaining Spanish land grant in Florida. And as I said earlier, I did extensive research on the family beginning in 2000. When I went to the mother house of the Sisters of St. Joseph in St. Augustine, I had previously requested access to the Fernandez and Villalonga papers. Upon arriving, Sister Thomas Joseph had a research table set up with a folder taken from an archival box. The archival box stood there, the folder was here. And she had two places set up because I took Linda Vaughn with me, both with gloves and a pad of paper and a pencil. And the folder is sitting right here. And before we could even sit down, she said, "Do you want copies of everything in the folder?" I didn't know what was in the folder, but I thought, oh my gosh, what is in this folder? I opened it, and on the very top was this letter from Bishop Curley, and the next one from Bishop Barry, which proves to me that the descendants of Domingo and Mary Fernandez still own the 1 acre Fernandez plot. This letter from Bishop Curley says, "Dear Miss Villalonga, I have had a letter from Mr. McCall, who was Leonilla's attorney, relative to the Fernandez Reserve. It seems from lawyers' opinions that same must remain as it is and cannot be disturbed. Hence you may make provision for its upkeep, and I shall accept the trust under your will. Kindest wishes to yourself and Edith. And Bishop Curley was the godfather of Leonila's daughter, adopted daughter. The second letter from Bishop Barry was written after the city had paved the street near the park and the convent. And it says, "Dear sisters, nearly everybody misunderstands the Villalonga Park business. It is not only a private park, but also a private burying ground. A trust fund for the upkeep of the place was given to Bishop Curley. The sisters have been superintending the upkeep, receiving semi-annually the funds for that purpose. There never was placed in his hands any funds for paving city streets. The property belongs to the estate, not to the sisters, nor the church, nor the bishop. The city can sue the estate for the paving assessment, which is a lien against the property. It might be a good thing if the church and the sisters jointly agreed to pay for the paving, since they enjoy the benefits of the use of the park. You'd better see the pastor about making such an arrangement." These two letters indicate to me that, along with the research that's been done, proves that this 1 acre known as the Fernandez Reserve is still owned by the descendants of Domingo and Maria Fernandez. This is the Villalonga Monument, and then Domingo and Mary. There are several graves besides Domingo and Mary, those of John Jane Julius and Mary Laura Villalonga, Elizabeth George and DeWitt Clinton Stewart, Leonila Villalonga, the infant children of John Jr. and Constance, and Manuela DeMarchi, a friend of Mary Fernandez. The twists and turns of this family history would make an excellent foundation for a mini-series, I think. There are more intriguing details about all of these people yet to be found. There are also more stories and interesting facts that I've not had time to relate to you today. The nearly 25 years of research into this family have made them my family. I continue to be fascinated about this family that still owns 1 acre of land in Fernandina. Inevitably, the last Spanish land grant in Florida is still in existence. Thank you. You have a question, Richard?
Well, in the middle of your presentation, you mentioned the Dames Point Lighthouse.
Yes.
I've never heard of it or seen it or know anything about it.
It's no longer in existence. It was right there at the curb of the St. Johns River in earlier days. Probably by 1880s, the river was dredged and the lighthouse became obsolete.
So they knocked it down?
They knocked it down. Yes.
So it's fascinating to me. I was born and raised in Albany, New York, where the biggest hotel was the DeWitt Clinton Hotel. And Albany was, of course, on the Hudson River, and it was Dutch settled for Orange, and it was all Dutch reformed and everything. And I'm like thinking, how did DeWitt Clinton get? I mean, there must be.
I don't know whether back in the 1800s, as you know, people would name their children for famous people. DeWitt Clinton was the founder of one of the railroads or inventors.
I think so, but just,
you go through and you find all these kids named for George Washington and Abraham Lincoln,
yeah,
and Theodore Roosevelt, and all sorts of famous people. In my own family, both my grandfather and one of his brothers had the middle name of Dow, D-O-W, and I never could figure out why the family would name two children with the same middle name. I thought, and I could not find any connection to a Dow family. Several years ago, when I was doing some work for the Daughters of the American Revolution, I was going through old application papers, and all of a sudden, in these 1800 generations, there were these kids named Lorenzo Dow something, and my grandfather's brother was Lorenzo Dow. And I thought, okay, Google comes into effect. I discovered that Lorenzo Dow was an itinerant preacher who walked up and down the east coast of the United States, begging for a place to stay, preaching sermons, and children all up and down the coast were named for him. So, yes.
DeWitt Clinton was the first governor of New York,
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
and he instituted the building of the Erie Canal
Okay,
from Albany to Buffalo.
okay, thank you.
So how did you
I'm not
get
a
down
New Yorker,
there?
I'm a native Floridian.
Yeah, so it's interesting
Yeah,
that it
so-
has a connection to Fernandina.
Yeah, so probably the family admired him. Whether they
Yeah.
ever had any contact with him, I don't know. But they must have named their son for him. Yes.
I'm not quite sure how to phrase this. Is there a family member or someone in the family who maintains a connection with the preserve, or who administers it now? Is it the diocese, and we just have to trust they do the right thing?
There is a large group of family members still in existence. The church still has that original grant back from 1905, which at the time was $100,000, which was invested in, and the church has not seen fit to give the family an accounting of how much money is left in there, if anything. But the church continues to be the one who is responsible for the upkeep.
Okay, so the family's no longer active in the management of that property? so to
No,
speak?
the family has, if you've been by there, and I don't want to be argumentative or anything, but the school has been encroaching on the grant as a playground.
Yeah, they just lay
And
tons of.
the family has objected to it, and I mean, we had a meeting with the church officials from the diocese November a year ago, and they're going to do what they want to do. My conjecture is that because it was the thing to do at that period of time, when the slaves died, they were buried outside the family cemetery. I don't know whether there are any unmarked graves on that acre or not, but it seems reasonable to me that there would be. But, you know, the family has tried to come to some accommodation with the church, and the church has been unbending.
Were you involved in the discussion about the most recent expansion of St. Michael's?
No,
Apparently,
I was,
the first plan infringed on the reserve? and
yeah,
they had to amend it?
the first plan encroached onto the reserve.
Right.
When that petition was denied by the Historic District Council,
Mhm.
they came forward with a new plan that did not encroach onto the
I didn't know
reserve.
if anyone came to you for expert testimony.
No, I tried, an attorney for the church called me at one time and wanted me to give him copies of all of my research.
Oh, jeez.
And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you copies of my research. Well, you've shared it with the Historic District Council. I said, I have verbally shared information. I have not shown them any of my research. I said, if you want to go to libraries and museums and archives from here to California and make long distance phone calls to Australia, have at it. But you're not having my research. Eventually, my research may come to the museum. I haven't decided where it's coming to yet. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned that Isabel Daniel was married in Malaysia and later was traveling in Kenya?
In Kenya, yes, her husband died in Kenya and is buried in Kenya. They owned coffee plantations and raised their one daughter there.
Huh.
Yeah. I mean, I said, this family has spread from Fernandina to Kenya, Africa, to Australia, England, Scotland. Any other questions? Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you all so much for coming this afternoon.